don't know me, my name is Stephen Spargo, and I have the great pleasure of being President of Golf Victoria as we speak. I hope I'm still President when we conclude the morning. No, it's not going to be that painful. The sad thing about being in a room at Huntingdale looking out the window, many of you probably think there's a far, far better thing that I should be doing than listening to a discussion about the law and participation in golf and golf clubs. However, I urge all of you to at least for a moment, think a little bit about what we're wanting to address this morning. And really just this morning's discussions aren't really that complicated. It's all about the underlying values that underpin what we need to do in all our golf clubs. Namely, fairness in the way we treat people in our clubs, and the encouragement of people to participate in club life to the fullest extent possible. So those two principles, I think, flow through everything that will be said this morning. And they're simple principles, and I know many of you are well aware of them, but it's useful perhaps to just remind everyone of the context before we start. My task is to just introduce quickly the speakers who will speak in order. First up, we've got Stephen Pitt, who is, again, I know many of you will be aware, is the CEO of Golf Australia and has held that role since November 2008 before his stint as Chief Executive of Golf Queensland. Steve has a joyful task. He has to try and drive golf as a sport in this country, and focusing in particular at the moment on this critical issue of how we unify the sport both from the amateur side and the professional side to ensure at some near point we will have a single integrated administrator for the whole country, which I think is a really exciting opportunity. Following Steve, we have Kristen Hilton, who is the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commissioner, who's going to address us on the equal opportunity issues in the law affecting clubs, which I'm sure many of you will be very interested to hear about. Kristen has had a stellar career, having been the Executive Director of the legal practice and with Victorian Legal Aid, Executive Director of the Public Interest Law Clearinghouse, and in 2006 was honoured by the Law Institute of Victoria for her contribution in community legal practice. So we're really looking forward to hearing Kristen, and thank you very much for making time out of her busy schedule. Bridie O'Donnell will be the third speaker, who is currently the head of the Office for Women in Sport and Recreation, and I think the simple way of describing Bridie is that she's a medical practitioner who's had a diverse experience in medicine, but more so in her sporting career, where she's excelled in rowing and, of course, cycling, and in particular road racing. And Bridie is also a terrific humorist as well as incisive speaker about women's role in sport and how we all can do more to grow and encourage women to participate, not only in golf but across Victoria and so many sports. And just to finish up, one of course can't get away from another lawyer, Richard Redman, who was a consultant with the Australian Sports Commission in the governance area. He's going to talk to us a little about what good governance looks like. And so Richard will conclude, and after all the speakers have finished, we'll have some time for questions. Now, first up, I mentioned Stephen Pitt, who's going to speak to us, and I thought we'd asked him to just launch again what he launched in Adelaide, which was the Golf Australia's vision for women's participation in the game over the next little period. Why are we doing this? Simon Brookhouse received a question before the session started that a person from one club thought that this was meant to be a discussion about equal opportunity law. Well, it is, But most fundamentally, we've got to also look at what we need to do to ensure we encourage women to participate in the sport in greater numbers than currently is the case. So, Steve, without any further ado, can I ask you to speak to the audience this morning?
A new day is dawning for golf in Australia, where our game is opened up to everyone. Every woman and girl will be asking,
Want to play golf?
Want to play golf? Hey, want to play golf?
because golf is fun but fierce, social but competitive, active but relaxed, addictive but accessible. And this is what we need to do. Get more women on boards and in senior roles. Introduce girls to golf through fun and friendship. Open up our clubhouses and golf courses. Equal access, equal rights. More girls' golf hubs. More golf in schools. More heroes and champions to inspire. More female coaches to nurture and develop. More opportunities for everyone to play together. Celebrate the men who are champions of change. Bring the old guard along for the ride and show them that the new world is better. Deliver world-class experiences, online and in person. That's how we'll transform our sport and inspire women and girls to play golf. So,
Want to play golf?
Well, thank you very much, Steve, for the kind introduction. We've got a terrific turnout here today. I've actually spent most of the last week touring Queensland, doing road shows on One Golf, which is obviously very important for Australian golf, but I think we've got more people here today than we had in 5 or 6 Queensland sessions, so this is obviously very important as well. I'm here mainly to talk about the Vision 2025 program, but I'd like to make some general comments. Firstly, about the Equal Opportunity paper. I'd like to thank Steve and Simon Brookhouse and the GolfVic team for the work they've done to develop this paper. They've worked in collaboration with the Victorian State Government and obviously with Golf Australia. From our perspective, this is something that we are going to roll out nationally in collaboration with state governments and state associations around the country. The paper does have endorsement from the RNA, and I do think that's obviously very important. I think we'd all appreciate that perhaps golf has been slow moving in some areas, and certainly in the gender issue. I think in some ways we've been a segmented sport for a long time. My personal story is I've worked for Golf Australia for 9 years, and before that I was at Golf Queensland for about 2.5 years. And when I started working in golf, I was CEO of the Queensland Golf Union and Women's Golf Queensland, the two bodies, and tasked with bringing those organisations together. And we did that in about 8 or 9 months, and along with Tasmania, we were the first 2 states to do it. But it took probably in excess of about 4 years for all of the states to get that done. So if you think about Golf Australia, we've only been an amalgamated body for about 12 years, and our states less than a decade. And if we drill down into district level, I think around the country, a lot of districts are still male and female. So I think there's still some work to go before we're really a homogenous sport. Golf Australia and Golf Victoria are not here to lecture clubs or to coerce clubs about how they operate. I think our role is to assist clubs and support clubs and to ensure that we're meeting the relevant legislation as a sport. And I think that's critically important. I do believe the future health of golf and our ability to create a better, more inclusive game for women and girls, I believe those things are absolutely intertwined. If we think about membership, for example, so if you look at a membership graph from 1970 to the present day, in 1970, 34% of our membership was female. So we had 200,000 male members and 100,000 female members. And what happened over the next 20 to 30 years, through the 70s, 80s and early 90s, is our sport grew enormously. Membership grew, but unfortunately that growth was all male golfers. There's a point in the pathway where male membership grew from 200,000 to 394,000 members. And at the same point in that journey, female members grew from 102,000 to 104,000. Now, they had actually hit 110,000 a couple of years before and were on the decline. But you think about that, we had nearly 200,000 extra male golfers, only 2,000 extra female golfers. And it probably demonstrates that the product we were offering wasn't attracting female golfers. Society had changed. And as a sport, we hadn't really adapted to meet those changes. So in some ways, we've probably offered a pretty lousy product for half of the population for a period of time, and that's just not sustainable for us or actually for any sport. So it's important from that perspective. If you think about those trends and those numbers, if we had 34% of our membership today were female and we'd kept those same ratios, we'd have 500,000 members instead of 400,000. So it is quite profound, and you think what an extra sort of 90,000 members would do for our game right now. I think beyond that, golf, the future of golf and the importance of women and girls within that, if you think about the major barrier facing golf, and that is time. We talk about cost and time, but to me time absolutely outweighs cost. And if you think about time, what our major barriers are, it's work pressures and wanting to spend time with family. So I think we do have an opportunity, if we can make our clubs and facilities more family orientated, that we start to take away that barrier for some people. So we start to make golf clubs places where families can spend some time together. I do think that's really important. I think the other thing we know about why female golf is important is in the household, women are far more engaged and more active in terms of making decisions about kids' sport. So it makes sense if we've got female golfers in the household that we've got a much better chance of getting female juniors to our game. So that's why it's important. It's obviously important to do the right thing for women and girls and to give them as much access as possible to our great game. But also I think golf will be much better for it if we can change and transform our sport. And that's really what 2025 vision is about. It's about how do we transform our sport and make it more inclusive for women and girls. There's 4 major pillars in the Vision 2025 document, and they are marketing, how we market our sport, and how we do a better job of marketing it better towards women and girls. I think the other thing we can do in that space is create better partnerships. We've done a pretty good job around the Women's Australian Open in recent years, but I think at grassroots there's a lot of companies, governments and private individuals who want to be involved in female golf. Secondly, the second pillar is high performance in coaching. If we look at our elite female golfers, we've actually had a pretty successful time. 3 of our best emerging players are all female. That's Minjee Lee, Sue O and Hannah Green, is my time up? Who's had a terrific time lately. So we've got great top-end talent, but our talent pool isn't deep enough beyond that. We do need to fix that. I think also, and quite dramatically, our coaching numbers just aren't where they need to be. About 5% of accredited coaches are female, and that's a terrible number. The good news is it was not so long ago it was 3%, so I congratulate the PGA and ALPG for what they've done to already increase that number. I know the intakes on traineeships are far more skewed towards females, so I think there is some positive news ahead in that space. But obviously we want to get those numbers right up, and we want to have great role models getting more girls into golf. The third pillar is culture and leadership, and we all know that we need to improve in this area. If I look at my time in golf, I think golf has certainly come a long way from where it was 10 or 11 years ago. We're seeing more women on club boards, and I think that's absolutely critical, but our numbers are still too small. So we need to address that, and it's not just clubs. Organisations, including Golf Australia, need to do a better job of attracting women into senior positions within the organisations. And the final pillar is around grassroots, and I think we need a friendlier introduction into golf for women and girls. Like any new golfer, we need to nurture our women and girls better through the early stages of their golfing life, and we need to have more welcoming environments within clubs and facilities. I think junior girls are really important in this space, and I do think we need environments where junior girls have other girls their own age around them and are really happy to operate. So I think cluster clubs that can attract a large number of junior girls are really important. What does success look like in this area? I think success will be determined largely by our ability to invest properly into the Vision 2025 program. And in my view, we need $4 to $5 million over the next few years to really make that work. And the good news is that's already started. We've probably raised 20 to 25% of that already. And I do think there's an appetite out there through private benefactors, through public companies and through governments and organisations like the RNA to actually get in and invest in this area. And I think we've seen women's sport in this country blossom in the last few years, and I think that holds us in very good stead. In terms of benchmark numbers, I think the key things that I think we need to achieve, we need to get our member numbers up. I mean, I think it'd be nice to break back over that high water mark of 110,000 members within the lifespan of Vision 2025. I think our coaching numbers, we need to get those numbers right up. Over time, Gav, maybe 20% or even higher. I'm not sure what the time frame for that will be, but I think that's a goal that we must have. And I think finally we need to benchmark the number of women that we have in boards, club boards, organisation boards, and really try to raise that number over the next 5 years. So that's what success looks like. I think it's critically important for our game that we do an excellent job in this space. I think the future of golf will be improved massively if we can make golf a more inclusive and better game for the women and girls in our communities. So that's it for me. Thank you very much for your attention, and we'll talk soon. Thanks.
Oh, good morning, everyone. My name's Kristen Hilton, and I'm the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commissioner. And I'd like to thank you very much for the invitation here this morning, and begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and pay my respects to any elders past or present. And I congratulate Stephen and the organisers this morning on a great event and also a fantastic vision for 2025. When I left home early this morning and my daughter said to me, "Mum, where are you going?" And I said, "I'm going to talk at a golf club." And she's 7, and she said, "What are you going to talk about?" And I said, "I'm going to talk about gender equality or more women and girls playing golf." And she said, "Well, remember to tell them that I won the last time we played golf, which was mini golf at Ocean Grove." But nonetheless, she thought that you should be reminded of that. The boys lost it, by the way, when she did win. But I also want to congratulate Golf Victoria and Golf Australia for the collaboration on the guide that we've put together. And I think it's a really important part of your efforts to significantly increase women and girls playing this sport. Sport lies at the heart of the Australian identity. I know this. I grew up in northeast country Victoria, and the golf club was next to the trotting club, which also housed the martial arts hall, which doubled as a 21st venue, and people booked out to celebrate their engagements as well. Around the corner from the golf club was the footy club, and the netball courts were just down from that, and the tennis courts were around the corner as well. And these were places of community and connection. They were intergenerational. They were really the lifeblood of our communities. Sport is such an important part of our culture. It can be key to people's health and happiness. And golf clubs, like other sporting clubs, are places for people to come together to play a game that they love. It's vital then that that game, as Stephen said, is accessible to everyone, and that our clubs provide a safe and inclusive environment for everyone to participate in. And that's why equal opportunity laws apply to sport. The spirit of this law is to ensure that we can all participate in public life and that our community is free from discrimination and harassment. Last week we celebrated International Women's Day and we acknowledged the many fantastic achievements of women in public life, in politics, in sport, in art, in science. But I think it was also a reminder that there's some way to go. But off the back of that week, I am really delighted that we can assist in the launch and publication of the Equal Opportunity in Golf Guide, which is a practical guide to give you knowledge about what you need to do to prevent sex discrimination in sports and in club membership. Equality of opportunity is not just about a pay gap or who chairs a board or who gets elected into Parliament. It's about looking with fresh eyes and greater knowledge and understanding at where inequality manifests in our communities and how it manifests. The challenges to ensuring that there's equality for women in sport are ones that echo across the community. They are discriminatory attitudes sometimes and behaviours that are simply just accepted as the norm. And challenging sexist attitudes in the media, in workplaces, in education, in our sports clubs is the best way we can go about bringing change across our society. By showing real leadership in supporting women and girls and creating opportunities for them to participate on an equal playing field, sporting clubs can help drive out the sexism that limits women from reaping the health, social and economic benefits that physical activity and participation in sport brings. The fact that women make up only 20% of all golf clubs nationally is significantly out of step with other sports and out of step with contemporary Australian society. Here in Victoria, we are more progressive, as in most things, and we have a 23% female membership, but even that's low. And at all levels of sport, research shows that women's competitions are not prioritised in the same way as men's. Girls and women's teams often have inadequate change facilities, they play in ill-fitting uniforms, and they're allocated access to grounds only after all of the men's comps have been accounted for. Over the last couple of years, we've done a lot of work with Victoria Police and understanding sexism in Victoria Police, and one of the assistant commanders that I work a lot with said that after he started to do this work and he started to see how gender inequality had played out in the force, he started to see it everywhere. He has a son and a daughter, both of whom play in school cricket teams, and he said that he'd drop off his son and his son would go into the fantastic facilities to get changed and his daughter would get changed in the car. So all of a sudden he started to see gender inequality everywhere. Without the right resources and the right approach, women's game will suffer through the lack of improvement, lack of sponsorship, and importantly, lack of media coverage. And this is despite all the benefits that we know that women and girls reap, but individually from participating in sport, but also the financial benefits that come from women and girls participating in sport. If we want to see the next generation of girls playing golf, we need to see older girls and women playing as well. At the Commission, our vision is for a fair and equal society, an inclusive Victoria, where everyone is respected and treated with dignity. And we know that sport is a key place in which to transform this vision into a reality. The Equal Opportunity Act 2010 is Victoria's anti-discrimination law. And the purpose of the Act is to eliminate discrimination to the greatest possible extent. It's designed to promote equality, it's designed to promote fairness, and it makes discrimination in sport against the law. It also operates in a number of other areas that can be relevant to sports and club memberships, such as employment and the provision of goods and services. Under the Act, it's against the law to treat or to propose to treat someone unfavourably based on a personal characteristic. There are 18 personal characteristics under the Act, which are protected by the Act, and they include sex, age, disability, race, religion, sexual orientation. And the guide we're launching today specifically looks at sex discrimination. Under the Act, if a golf club's rules don't allow women to access the golf course at the same time as men, or do not allow women to have an equivalent but separate playing time to men, it's likely that these rules are against the law. This is because the right to play golf on the course is one of the key benefits of club membership. and denying or limiting access to a benefit provided by the club is likely to be considered discrimination under the Act. There have been cases that we've heard about where women have been allocated shorter tee-off times and fewer playing hours, and these have gone before anti-discrimination bodies in other states and territories, and they've found to be discriminatory and unlawful in those places. In Victoria, the Act prohibits discrimination in relation to all benefits that arise from being a member of the club: the ability to hold a club membership, the way that members are treated in exercising their club membership. For example, refusing to nominate a person for committee membership based on their gender is likely to be discrimination under the Act. One of the elements of the law is also about the concept of a positive duty. And all clubs have a positive duty that's not just to comply with the law, but actually to take steps, progressive steps, to ensure that the environment is inclusive and free from discrimination. The law does also recognise that there are some situations where it's possible to have different rules for men and women in sport, including for progression to elite competition level. And in addition, clubs can take action to support the inclusion of women by taking special measures. So this guide deals specifically with discrimination in golf and club membership. And we've tried to look at the common issues that may arise in golf clubs. It talks about special measures. So these are positive steps that may be taken to level the field for disadvantaged groups, and it provides information about how issues can be resolved or how clubs can go about being more inclusive. It also looks at the complaint process, so where someone does feel like they've discriminated against, who they can complain to under either state or federal law. And it also, we've provided, so the guide is about 20 pages long, but we've also provided a 4-pager, which is something that you can take away, have a quick read of, and it's designed to ensure, it's not designed to be a punitive guide, it's actually designed to go alongside your Vision 2025 to make sure that the clubs and the structures and the policies that underpin them are as inclusive as they possibly can be. The guide is just one resource. The Commission also has a range of other services to support organisations and individuals on these issues. We have a complaints handling function where if you feel like you've been discriminated against, we can work with you and the person who you feel has discriminated against you to try and resolve that issue. And we also provide education, and this year we'll be working with Golf Victoria to help provide clubs with some training around the guide. If there was ever a time when sport and life, or sport and politics, and sport and community were separate categories, then I think that time is probably over. Sport is omnipresent. It's everywhere. There is more reporting in the media on sport than any other interest area, even politics. And sport has become more encompassing, the issues that complicate every other domain of our society are also on display. Whether that's celebrity or sexism or racism or social cohesion or class. Sport is now, for better or worse, the prism through which almost every issue is played out. For example, the gender pay gap has been a matter of concern for decades, but when the difference between the money paid to male and female professional cricketers and footballers became clear, the outrage went up a notch. And before you say that you just want to tee off, remember that sport has always been an elaborate and contested metaphor for life. There are stories of heroicism, of failure, of triumph. They are places of community and connection. They are places where friendships are made, where leadership and influence and belonging takes place. And if this all sounds a bit much for a Tuesday morning after a long weekend, look at the people here around you. People who are here because no doubt they love the game. They love belonging to a club. They love the friendships that rise out of the game. And at the heart of this guide is ensuring that this opportunity and that this sense of belonging and fairness is available to all people, irrespective of their gender or any other attribute. And that we go in eyes wide open to adjust the policies or the attitudes or the structures so that we can let more people in. Thank you.
Good morning. I have a confession to make. I have never swung a golf club. But I did, thanks to Simon, go and see my first Oates Vic Open just a few weeks ago, which was beautiful weather, so well done. But really importantly, an amazing event, really lifting the bar, I think, exactly as Kristen described, to allow men and women to compete equally and earn equally. When I went into medical school, the intake, mostly across the country, is around 50% men and women. So I went to an all-girls school where I kind of graduated thinking I could probably be an astronaut if I wanted to. And then I went to medical school and thought, yeah, I could do anything I want if I want to. I was really interested in surgical training, but then I started looking around at what the surgeons looked like, the sort of hours that they pulled, and then the sorts of, effectively, the unconscious bias that was established to ensure that everyone who did surgical training sort of looked the same. And I mean as in the kind of work that they did and the sort of lifestyle that they led. So I instead decided to become a poorly paid professional athlete because I thought that'll really show the College of Surgeons. But interestingly, at the time, when I did veer away from surgical training, 90% of doctors who got onto the surgical training program were men, single men living at home. So it meant that effectively to pass the surgical primary and to get through surgical training, you needed to have people facilitating your life. Usually a wife or parents will do. They'll cook for you, clean for you, so that you can work long hours, study for the exams, and fulfil the requirements. Now, the College of Surgeons didn't see anything wrong with this. They said, well, this is the way we've always done it. You've got to do 50 weeks a year on call, and if you can't hack it, maybe you're not tough enough. So a really great example of an organisation that's also struggling to come to terms with modern society, as we've all seen in the news over the last couple of years in terms of how they treat women in their organisation. So, as I said, I went over to Europe and I raced as a professional bike rider in my 30s, an unusual thing. I don't recommend it. It's very challenging. But I had come from a background of doing other sport, in particular rowing and triathlon, and it was a really great example for me to experience those two sports where, in fact, not only gender equality but gender equity is completely omnipresent. In triathlon, particularly because it's an American sport and Title IX has existed in the United States for over 40 years, not only do women get paid the same in the Hawaii Ironman, the racing that I competed in, but the commentators are men and women and they speak about the men and women athletes in exactly the same way. Although participation rate at Hawaii Ironman is around 15% women, and that is, of course, because the time required to train for an Ironman is ludicrous, and most of the time there are women at the finish line with prams and kids with signs that are saying "Go Daddy," and the 85% of the competitors that are men have dedicated all their personal time and spare life to training for Ironman. So, of course, we all know athletes are selfish, so that's a given. But it just goes to show that sort of demographic of people who can make the time, and as we described and heard from Stephen, that it becomes a barrier if your work or your family are interfering with your ability to desire a rock and roll pro triathlete lifestyle. Rowing, of course, has great gender equity in Australia, not in terms of just access from clubs, but schools. The head of the Schoolgirls Regatta, which I'm speaking at next week, is the biggest regatta in the Southern Hemisphere. And girls come out of sports like rowing and they come out of triathlon thinking, my body is good for something other than what it looks like. My body can be strong. I can contribute to a team in a meaningful way. We can lose together. We can win together. We can set goals together. I don't know if you've read the Ernst & Young paper around sport and what it does for women, but in fact, when all of the organisations that have women CEOs globally were examined, 90% of those female CEOs have competed in sport. And they established that this was because they've learned how to problem solve, they've learned how to be resilient, they've learned how to fail and find other ways to do things, and they don't give up. And this is why we want more girls and women playing sport. This is why we want people being exposed to opportunities like golf, to learn a skill, to not be adequate at that skill, to keep wanting to perfect it. I hear that that's what golf is really. It's just about dealing with disappointment on a daily basis. When I came back from Europe and I'd drawn down on all of my mortgage and I had no money left and I had to go back to being a lowly doctor, I started working at the Epworth, and I was extremely fortunate to take on an amazing job at Epworth Health Check. And my role there was with an enormous amount of opportunity for time. And as many of you know, if you've ever been unwell, I'm sure many of you have been sick or injured, that when you go to a doctor, the biggest problem is that you feel the doctor doesn't have enough time to listen to you, or perhaps they don't even ask you how you are. I've got medical colleagues who say, "Oh, I don't say how are you because then they're probably going to answer." And that could just go on and on forever. And that's deeply depressing to me, that we have physicians that aren't asking people how they are. So I would sit across from a patient for 2 hours and we would talk about all aspects of their health and wellbeing, physical and mental, and then we'd look at particular medical testing that they might need to establish either that they were in good health or that we needed to address some areas that needed to be managed. And one of the most fascinating things that I discovered was that more time and more evidence and more education didn't enable behaviour change in people who are resistant to change. Now, I've never been an addict other than being addicted to exercise, but I can quit any time I want. But for people who are addicted to nicotine, for example, which is a substance that's 100 times more addictive to brain receptors than heroin is, you can present them with evidence on a daily basis. They can feel terrible. They can cough and splutter and have erectile dysfunction and diabetes and heart disease, but they can't stop smoking. So a smart person with a medical degree presenting them with this information doesn't get them to change their behaviour. Children throwing cigarettes out the window of the car doesn't get them to change behaviour. Terrible breath and not being able to kiss all the people you want to kiss is clearly not getting them to change behaviour. And so that showed me a lot of things. It showed me that there are reasons why sporting organisations don't want to change the way they do things. And certainly in this new job that I've been in for 4 months, I've learned a lot about the amazing passion and commitment of people in the sporting sector in Victoria. But I've also learned just how difficult it is for many of those organisations to change. In 2015, there was an inquiry into women and girls in sport and active recreation commissioned by the original opposition government and then carried forward by the Andrews Labor government. It was chaired by Peggy O'Neill and there were 9 extremely intelligent and motivated people on that inquiry. And from that came 9 recommendations around how we could improve the opportunities for girls and women in sport and active recreation in Victoria. And it was determined that we needed to act on all of those immediately. And so an Office for Women in Sport and Recreation was established in 2017. So they immediately took a little bit of time. And then they advertised for the position and me and a few hundred other people applied because we thought this is a dream job. I think for any woman who's been an elite athlete in a sport like road cycling as I have, where there's no minimum wage, there's no governance over who buys a licence to own a women's cycling team, there's extraordinarily frightening rates of financial, sexual and emotional abuse. There's leaving athletes at races because they didn't perform well and they have to find their own way home. That happened to me. There's not paying people. That happened to me all the time. There's not getting fed, not getting water at races. You think this is crazy, that wouldn't really happen, but it does. And then the contrast, of course, of seeing your colleagues, male colleagues like Cadell Evans or Stuart O'Grady before he was busted for doping, to see the opportunities that they were presented, the amount of money they could earn, the lifestyle they could live, or more importantly, the opportunity that that led to in terms of having a career in that sport, it was deeply disheartening. And so when I applied for this job, I thought this is going to bring together everything I ever wanted to do and be, which is improve the circumstances for girls and women in Victoria, to have them benefit from the amazing things that I developed, the resilience and the coping skills and the strategies and the communication that I learned by being an elite athlete. But it was also going to bring some of the skills I have in dealing with resistant peoples. And in the last 4 months, I've met with an enormous number of sports and committees. We held regional forums all over Victoria in 8 cities and towns to hear from people in regional Victoria about what their challenges were. And trust me, a lot of their challenges are like yours. They're extremely passionate people who give a lot of their time, their love, their support, their family and their investment into something they've been doing for a very long time. But they also say to themselves, but this is the way that it works. And yet we know that, in fact, people can change behaviour if the landscape changed. And I'd like to just give you a couple of brief examples. Women have been permitted to be fighter pilots in the Australian Air Force since 1989. But up until 2016, there were no female Top Gun pilots. Maybe because they kept just putting up pictures of Tom Cruise and Val Kilmer and saying, if you don't look like that, you don't get in. But what they determined was the selection criteria and the testing process only allowed those types of men, not just alpha men, but kind of narcissistic psychopaths to get through Air Force training. Apologies to any Air Force pilots in the room. But you do have to be a little bit of a psychopath and have a pretty high risk appetite to want to destroy extremely expensive equipment that the taxpayer has paid for. So what they thought was maybe we need different types of people in the Air Force. So they modified some of the testing. They kept encouraging women to apply, and they didn't modify it to make it easier or to find weaker people. They didn't hire women who weren't meritorious, but they just looked at what do we really need from a fighter pilot. And when 2 women graduated in 2016, the other thing that Kristen's colleague, Kate Jenkins, determined when she was working with the Air Force was, let's try something radical. Let's not showcase who these women are. It's always hard to be the first woman. Just ask Julia Gillard or even indeed Hillary Clinton. That people will frequently say, I'm okay with a woman being a leader. I'm okay with a woman being a fighter pilot. Just not that woman. We know that the first woman, or women particularly in leadership roles, are held under far greater scrutiny than their male colleagues. There are plenty of mediocre male politicians. We've heard all about them in the last couple of weeks. Men and women make mistakes alike. But to be the first female fighter pilot was the kind of pressure and scrutiny that the Air Force felt that that woman didn't need. She needed to be able to do her job without excessive scrutiny. The second example I'll give you is also from the Defence Force, and that is when the Special Forces determined that their SAS group were not always being able to comply with what they needed to perform, particularly overseas. They determined that a Special Forces clone, if we can call him that, looks the same as all his other colleagues. He's generally around 6'3" and 120 kilos, with a very fine physique, larger at the top, narrower in the middle, and can carry a couple of boulders over his head whilst being very mentally stressed. And yet what they were finding was that these big brutes, who are highly trained, an enormous investment for Australia, aren't very diverse. They stand out in any type of market in the Middle East. They're too tall, they're too muscular, and they're very, very Anglo. And so amazingly, what the Defence Force and what Army decided was the landscape has changed. We need people who look different, who can blend into a marketplace in Tehran, for example. What about if we open this up to women? A woman I spoke to passed SAS testing. She lived in Perth, her and 5 female colleagues with 750 male colleagues. And you thought your life was bad. Imagine living in Perth with 750 army men. And what they did was they grabbed these 6 women and said, hey, would you like to be involved in some testing? What about now some more testing, some psychological testing, some physical testing? The only one thing they had to change about SAS selection for these women was the power to weight ratio. So instead of asking a 55 or 60 kilogram woman to carry the same amount of weight as a man, they said relative to your body weight. So that's gender equity, isn't it? It's modifying things, as Kristen has described, to allow everyone to have the same opportunity. 5 women passed SAS selection. 3 of those women have been working overseas with their colleagues. And do you think there was any pushback from their colleagues? Absolutely none. The men in their group said, oh, you passed selection, the hardest thing ever in the history of Army. You must be good enough. You have merit. We don't care what tests were changed. You're here and we need you. And so those women are able to blend in and help the rest of their team do the right work. I think if Army and Air Force can make changes, then we all can. We have to argue that they are the last bastion in terms of rigid gender stereotypes. And they're already starting to think about how they could be different in terms of modifying and modernising to fit in with the rest of the community. So my role now is to enable Change Our Game, the campaign that Minister Erin launched last year to increase participation, increase women in leadership roles, improve facilities and achieve a 40% board quota by the 1st of July 2019 for all state sporting associations who receive funding from the Victorian government. And I'm really pleased to hear that one of the things you're looking at is coaching, and that's an issue across the board in sports all over Victoria. Unfortunately, women don't want to be coaches and they don't want to be umpires and referees. Already we've seen 3 sports in the last 12 months where a man, usually a father who may even be on a board or a CEO, has abused a young female referee or an umpire across 3 different sports. So you can understand why your 15-year-old daughter's probably not putting her hand up to say, oh, yes, please, I'll referee this under-11s basketball game, because she's worried she's going to get screamed at. by an aggressive parent. There are aggressive parents everywhere, but sticking to the rules and having people to support her throughout that process and know that she will be assisted, enabled and supported to do her job as an umpire and maybe have a career in it is a really important thing. So we want women and girls to be participating across all levels of sport, not just elite sport, not just participation, but in roles in governance where they're holding the keys to the shed, if you like. And regional Victoria has been a really challenging landscape for a lot of sports. We're seeing a lot of football, netball clubs who've been doing it a certain way for a certain amount of time, and they are forming the fabric of that community, as Kristen outlined. It's often the only place that people come together and meet. But if you're a girl who just doesn't want to play netball or maybe wants to play footy, and yet we now know there are nearly 1,000 new girls and women's footy teams in Victoria over the last 2 years. Mind-blowing. So that's created a new problem, not enough grounds, and ground capacity has become a really challenging and hot issue for clubs trying to manage that. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is that you are already leading the way. You've formed a partnership and an alliance. You've got great leadership from Golf Australia and Golf Victoria, and you've been using the best resources you can to ask the questions, which are we doing this the best way? And if not, how can we do it better? You're not going to come up with answers immediately, and you're not going to be able to change everyone's minds straight away. Just imagine that they're a chain smoker with heart disease, and you'll see that they will continue to be resistant until they work out the timing for themselves. But you need to provide education and support. And the other point I wanted to make is you're not alone. That's been the fortunate position I've been in the last 4 months is every single sport and every single active recreation organisation in this state has challenges. They all have things that they need to do better. They all have things, they're all short on money, they're short on facilities, they need more women and girls, they need to modify the ways they recruit people and retain people. And so sharing information across sports is a really important one. Bowls Victoria has also had this issue around membership and sort of probably more rigid ways in which the sport is enacted. Rules and regulations that if you're a young woman showing up to a bowls club saying, I think this could be fun, my girlfriends and I want to do this on a Tuesday, they say, oh no, not Tuesdays. And you can't wear it with shorts that are that short or shoes like that. And what that does is it tells those women, yeah, we don't want you at our club. And while regulations and clothing and those sorts of things are important, they're important for history and for legacy and for maintaining an image of a sport. I completely appreciate that. I started bike racing and wore socks that were the wrong length, and I got teased mercilessly. I never wore socks the wrong length ever again. I had the best socks. But what we know is that it's okay to allow people to have modified versions of the sport. Hockey have done it. They've done funding from Vic Health and brought up J-ball, which means that parents who, instead of just watching their kids play, can play a 45-minute session with bigger balls, bigger bats, no knee pads, wider goals. They can get some exercise. People are still engaged in the sport of hockey, and it's not sticking rigidly to the rules that have been in this way forever. And what they're seeing is increased membership, greater participation, a greater sense of community around hockey and hockey training, and people are really engaging with that sport. There's no reason why golf can't do that, and we know Megan Carr, the Golf Victoria Participation Manager, has been working very closely up with Sport Northeast in the Hume region to ask clubs what they could maybe do differently to attract girls and women and to retain them. So I absolutely want to hear from you if there are questions or you want to email me. I'm okay with abuse. I've worked with the AFL. I know all about cranky people. But I really would love for you to engage as much as possible, and don't feel like you need to be on board immediately. A lot of people will have questions. Change doesn't need to be frightening though. It can actually inspire you to think differently about how your club will work better, not just for you, but to attract more people. Because, I mean, that's what we want. We want more people playing the sport that you all clearly love and feel very passionate about. So thank you so much.
Morning everyone, my name's Richard Redmond from the Australian Sports Commission. Our CEO, Kate Palmer, was asked to come today. She couldn't make it, so I am here in her stead, and she sends her best regards to golf. By even being here today, I've won a bet. My golf swing is so bad that a good friend of mine said I would never be invited onto a Sandbelt club in Victoria. So I'm $50 richer for being here. So thank you, Golf Vic, for that. we've had three fantastic presentations today. I've actually put together a slideshow because I don't talk off the cuff as well as my predecessor speakers, but I wanted to keep it lighthearted as well because Tuesday morning after the long weekend, as has been mentioned. So I thought just to get us going, perhaps some interaction, shout out the questions, and then I saw that you've got the thing in front of you, so you've all turned the page and know the answers. But if you're born in the 70s and grew up in the 80s, such as I did, or even before, you'll be aware of this character Norm, and the Life Be Unit logo will be jingling through your head right now. But just to get started, have a think about what percentage of Australians you believe are interested in sport. Spoiler alert, for those that have already looked. 92%, our research shows at the Sports Commission, 92%, which is quite high, and what even surprised me more when I first saw that was 6 sports on average the average Australian follows. What drives Australians to be active? Think about it. Fun and enjoyment, social reasons, and just physical health and fitness in general are by far the largest drivers for activity in the sporting area. And performance and competition only is about 1 in 20 people. So that's what drives them to get involved. And finally, has been mentioned before, but what are the biggest barriers to entry into sport and for staying in sport in Australia? If you think about that for a moment, not too long. 40% list time and carrying an injury or health reasons as well. And only about 1 in 20 actually list age or laziness or, in fact, a dislike for sport as a barrier to actually getting involved. Sorry, someone put all this fancy stuff on together that I'm not au fait with. So what does all this mean? So on very broad principles, that 9 out of 10 people are interested in sport. Most of them are interested for social reasons, to have fun and to be active, and most of them are time poor. So if we consider those points, the challenge for sports and sporting clubs is to remain relevant. New businesses are emerging out of this desire for flexible sport and combined with frustration at traditional rigidity and club systems. People are changing in what they are looking for in all products, and sport is no exception. At the Sports Commission, we're constantly getting feedback of I want to play, when I want to play, and where I want to play, and who I want to play with, which I think is quite relevant for golf clubs that have got 100, 120 years of tradition of how things have been done, to start thinking about in this brave new world, this digitised world. A few years ago, the ASC commissioned the CSIRO to put together this document, The Future of Australian Sport it's called. It's available on our website, and I commend it to anyone that's interested in this area. They did some great work. I say a few years ago, it was actually about 12 months ago. They did some great work, and they came up with these mega trends. And they said 6 mega trends. A mega trend is something that we might expect to see in 5-10 years' time rather than 5 months' time. And they came up with these 5 mega trends for 5 or 10 years' time. Already they're on our doorstep. Already many of them are here. Very quickly, the first one was a perfect fit. So personalised sport for health and fitness, i.e. new products, shorter formats, park run instead of athletics, all these kind of things. The trend from extreme sports to becoming mainstream, surfing, skateboarding now in the Olympic Games. Before they were, right at the edge of society almost. Now they're an everyday sport and recognised as such. The attainment of health and community goals through sport, government achieving weight loss, $1 spent on sport saves $5 spent in hospitals, and that old rhetoric that keeps getting passed around. Everybody's game is similar, trying to get called cultural and linguistic diverse communities involved in sport, integration of sport. New wealth, new talent, well, that's unashamedly the growth in Asia and how the Australian sports market can tap into that with some of our facilities and our coaching prowess. But the one I thought was particularly relevant for today to talk on governance and inclusion was this final one, which they headed tracksuits to business suits. And basically they're saying sport is getting more and more corporatised, more and more professional, certainly at the national level, certainly at the state level, and filtering down to club level as well. And it can be summed up to say that as the sport industry grows, it's no longer feasible to run a sport from the kitchen table, and everyone in this room that's involved in a club will be familiar with that. The Tuesday night committee rotated around the committee members' houses over dinner, bring a plate to organise next week's roster, who's paying the bills, who's keeping the lights on, so on and so forth. Those days are going, certainly at the national level and the state level for most sports, and the Sports Commission is doing a lot of work on that with those sports, and that is filtering down to the club level as well. And with that becomes questions for compliance at clubs. Traditionally, clubs were run by volunteers, still are. Australia very proud of its volunteer, and rightly so, volunteer support for sport. But it used to be that if someone wanted to, say, coach their under-10 sons or daughters soccer team, it would be a rotational basis. Righto, John, you're up next week, and then Tom, you're the week after, and Mary, you're the following week, or whatever it might have been. Now, if you want to be a soccer coach for even a juniors team, you have to have gone through coach training, you have to have done working with children check, you have to be lodged on the system, and this all has compliance requirements for club volunteers. And previously they didn't have to worry so much about this. Access to sport and sport offerings, we're all familiar with that. People no longer watch on TV, they watch it on their phones, their computer, their watch probably for the tech savvy. They no longer watch a whole game. They no longer even go to games. You can have the most passionate Manchester United or Liverpool fan sitting in Altona North in Melbourne, who's probably never been to Old Trafford or let alone London, probably never watched a full game, but can tell you every player and every trade just through the uptake of the sport. And we also talk about employment in sport. In 2006, there were 76,000 people employed in sport, that very broad and loose term, in Australia. Within 10 years, it's 186,000 and growing all the time. It's such a big industry, it's getting more professional and more corporate all the time. Again, this slide, I beg your pardon, just talks about some of the trends that we're seeing at state sporting organisation level and club level, transitioning to companies from an incorporated association, going from a president, which was a largely figurehead or ceremonial role, into a chair of a board, or more of a decision-making or strategic role, changing from articles of association, which is quite old Associations Act terminology, into new constitutions. Changing bylaws to policies and representative boards where, say, a national body had one member from each of the states forming the board, to now actually elected representative boards. So when we talk about modern governance, we're actually talking about two things. One, it's getting your structure right, but it's also equally putting behaviours in place. So how can a club do it, or how can a sport do it? Well, first of all, obviously it's getting your structures right. Constitution and bylaws, making sure they're right. Your board composition and skills, rather than just whose turn is it, who wants to be up, actually actively seeking the right people, doing skills gap analysis. What do we need on our board? Information-based decision making, and having accountability and reporting back to members and back to your stakeholders. Combine that with some behaviours, having processes and systems in place, reporting and evaluation on your decision making, and also culture. And the big one there is a commitment to improvement. Having those things in place is what the Australian Sports Commission pushes forward as modern governance principles. And we've got a lot of material on our website for anyone that's interested in that. How can a club start? A lot of these principles are designed for a national sporting body, then they're pilfered by state sporting organisations, but a lot of them apply down to the club level as well. So how does the Sports Commission say clubs can start taking some of these modern governance principles on board? Well, the first one is in your club to have the clarity of roles, responsibilities and relationships between your bodies, between your staff and volunteers, importantly. Knowing who's who in the zoo and what role each person have, particularly for a lot of compliance requirements under working with children's law and a lot of those laws coming forward now. Building and understanding through evidence, understanding your current participation and your growth and potential constraints for that, SWOT analysis kind of work. Developing a strategy. Every club, be it a a 40-member club in rural Victoria or through to one of the large sandbelt clubs, must have a strategy for where it is or where it's going, and that's the purview of certainly one of the most important aspects for a board. Make it easy to join, make it easy for people to sign up, make it easy for them to play with their friends and to volunteer and to get involved. Make it flexible again, different product offerings, and that's where the national and the state sports can help their clubs with developing different product offerings. We'll talk about that in a moment. And finally, and relevantly for today, embracing inclusiveness. And we'll talk about that a bit more, but if clubs aren't looking to work with their multicultural potential clients, women, and these traditionally not the strongest area of where the clubs have been working, then they're really missing out on the largest growth areas in sport currently. What we find that clubs are asking from their national sporting organisations and state sporting organisations is as follows. How can the state sporting organisation and the nationals help clubs in this field? Product development is a big one. Modified versions that are all costed out, that are packaged up and ready to be rolled out at clubs, and support for that. And I know Golf Vic is doing some great work with Golf Australia in that area at the moment. Business support. The club in a box model is the big one. Why don't you tell us what we need to do and we'll do it. We don't have the time or the resources or the skill to really roll out where our club's at governance-wise and where it needs to get to. Can't you just hand us something? Clubs constantly asking for that. So template constitutions, template policies, what can we adopt and put in place such that we're reaching that sort of standard? The same with learning and development tools. Facilities reviews, a big one. Reviewing venues, assisting them to make them safer and more accessible for all. And finally, help with marketing. Provide access to elite athletes to come to your club, come and try days, flexible membership models, and trying to develop some of these things really help clubs. What can the Sports Commission do to help clubs? Well, we've got a number of inclusion resources on our website. We're working with national bodies to try to filter this down, but a lot of this can be accessed directly by members of the public, just directly from our website. The first one is this AusPlay Focus Women and Girls Participation document that we commissioned. A lot of interesting reading, and I commend it to you. A lot of good facts in there and a lot of talking points to get you thinking. One that struck me was that when I read it, was that women and girls are as active as men and boys. The intensity of the workouts that they're doing are the same. It's just that the sessions are often shorter through time commitments and other family time commitments. So again, putting out this, well, if that's what we're finding in the stats, why don't we have a product that helps support that? Interestingly, another stat I saw in there was that about 90% of women that are 15 years and older do a sport activity at least once a week, 90% at least once a week, and about 60% of those pay money to do it. So as Stephen, I think right at the start today mentioned, time is the barrier far more than cost, and that is what we at the Sports Commission are seeing in our numbers as well. We have the Play by the Rules website that many of you will be familiar with. It has some great inclusion resources as well. We've recently done this program called the 7 Pillars of Inclusion. Again, targeted to help clubs, state sporting organisations and the national sporting organisations start thinking about some of the issues that they need to address when you're talking about inclusiveness and diversity. Simple things such as access. Is it safe to walk to the car park from the venue? Is it well lit? Is there public transport options for those that can't drive? Attitude, modifying your policy and processes, having choice of different products, working with different partners. I won't read them all out, they're all there for you can see and all freely available on our website. But again, talking points to start to get clubs thinking about these areas. Another one is on our Play by the Rules website is we have a section dedicated to gender inclusion. What can clubs do to prevent gender discrimination? I actually read in preparing for today's presentation, the document that Golf Vic has put together. And it's a fantastic document, and I was very impressed with it. And a lot of the topics it talks about in there are reflected in some of the work we've been doing as well on this. Consider implementing quotas, and previous speakers spoke about special measures. You can do these kind of things without running afoul of the laws to try to boost these areas. It's been shown to be a very effective way to achieve gender equity. At the Sports Commission, we mandate that the top 23 sports, the top 23 funded sports in Australia must have 40% female representation or face questions about your funding moving forward. Not every sport's there, not everyone's at 40% yet, but the majority are moving there. And when we do a year-by-year look, we're getting from teens in the 20s a few years ago into the 30s, most sports now, to many sports above 40 and into 50 and 60% of gender equity on boards. Women in golf clubs shouldn't just be filling out the Tuesday morning women's committee. They should be on the boards as well, driving the entire golf club, not just one short or smaller aspect of the club. Harness male champions for change at your club. Stephen Pitt's a member of that. Join the movement, hashtag join the movement. Make sure your member protection policies and code of conduct and all these documents cover this area off. If you are downloading that from Golf Vic, who's getting it from Golf Australia, then you can be sure of that it's all been ticked off as well. Finally, I just thought it might be worth mentioning what is happening in other sports. AFL at a national level, females are now over a quarter of all participants according to their latest stats, which is staggering from where that sport has come from only a few short years ago. The AFL Women's League has been a great success. At the community level, 56% growth in the women's game, only 7% growth overall for AFL at the community level. Of that 7%, 56% of it driven by getting women involved. So again, evidence that if you're not targeting these areas, or if you're neglecting them, you're missing out on the biggest chunk of growth for your sport and for your club. Again, for the Auskick program, which is the mini juniors, 21% growth. 21% growth in girls getting involved, 7% overall. So the vast majority of women getting involved in girls. Cricket nationally again, almost 30% of all participants are women in the sport now. 363 new all-girls teams in 2017 alone, and again years before that coming along very well. Soccer in Victoria, where I previously worked, actually had an 11% growth in female participation and almost 20% growth in junior participation through those numbers as well. So these are sports that are targeting an area that has traditionally been neglected because they've seen in it the value in having that growth. That's it for me today. I hope that's been an introduction to the AC and what we're trying to do in this space and how we might be able to help, and happy to take any question. Thank you very much.
Richard, thank you, and thank you to all of our contributors this morning. Could I ask each of the speakers to grab a chair on the stage, and we'll throw open the proceedings now to anyone who'd like to ask a question. And while the speakers are finding their chairs, could I possibly pose to Dorothy Dixon just to get things rolling, Kristen, and this whole issue of special measures, which is a really interesting issue as we try and encourage more women to become involved in not only in the game but in our through joining clubs. How do you go about that in a club? Is it a matter of getting small groups together, drawing up a sensible charter, focusing on the areas which are important, where a club feels it may need to examine a bit more carefully how it can foster greater involvement for women in clubs, and the experience that other sports are going through in that process?
So it's a really good question. The first thing to say, what special measures means, they're recognised under the Equal Opportunity Act, and really they're a range of things that you can do to promote equity or equality within your club. So if you know you have female underrepresentation in the club, then you might do things that on the face of it actually look like they're discriminating or against men or preferencing women, but they're done so in the knowledge that you want to increase the participation of women and girls. So it might be, and I think the first thing to say is that usually it's a pretty common sense approach. So it doesn't have to be legislatively really complicated. You don't need to necessarily go and seek an exemption. They also don't need to be in place for a really long period of time. So special measures might be something that just go for a couple of years until you've got your participation rates where they want to be. But it could be having extra sessions for women and girls during the week, or it could be saying that you're going to offer girls only comp on a particular day, or it could be I think one of the greatest things to do is to look around and see what other clubs or other sporting organisations have done. So, look beyond golf and look what cricket or soccer or AFL have done. But I think that we don't want to get too frightened about perhaps what special measures or exemptions might be, because more often than not, that it's something that will be a sort of common sense approach to trying to improve the participation of women and girls.
Right, thank you. Now I've kicked that off. Has anyone got a question they'd like to raise?
Dee Healy from the Keysborough Golf Club. The Keysborough Golf Club's been proactive in the space of trying to engender more participation across all boards, whether it be the younger profile demographic, the 35 to 50s alike. One of the things the club is now looking at is providing a concession for couples, whereby now at our golf club we've got 1.8% of our member base being couples, and we've been challenged now by putting that in place to see whether or not that is actually discriminative against the single participants in our golf club. So I'm just wondering if you had Kristen, some advice, or I appreciate you can't provide any legal advice on that.
Well, I'm looking over at my legal team who are here at the moment, and they're like mouthing things at me. But so what I would say first of all is that if there are particular things like that, which sounds like you're trying to increase family membership and that's a way of doing it, and if you're unsure about it, so firstly the guide can provide you with some information on those sorts of things, but also if you're unsure, call the Commission and we can talk you through those particular types of examples. On the face of it, it seems like again that you're trying to provide for a group that might be underrepresented or encourage participation from a different type of demographic. And so that would sound like, again, I'm looking at my lawyers, that would sound like a special measure that seems pretty reasonable. But if the other thing is that if you're getting pushback from people within the golfing community and you want to make sure that you're dealing with that in a way that makes sure you're taking their point into account as well. I think the best thing to do is to have a conversation about it and get them to try and understand why you're implementing that sort of measure. And if you can't do that, then we can also assist you with some more practical ways of resolving if it turns into some sort of dispute or conflict.
Right. I should say that those experiences also be very helpful to ensure that in your discussion, Simon and his team are aware of it, because I think the idea here is to try and garner experiences from all clubs and to run some workshops following today over the next 6 months to 12 months, just so that we can ensure that as things get resolved or the benefit of information that comes out of the Commission can be spread across the club base, which hopefully will be of value to many clubs.
And I think I mentioned that we're providing training sessions for a range of clubs over the next few months this year, partly based on the guide and partly based on those sorts of practical examples that are coming up for clubs. So the more information we have, or the more descriptions or stories that we have, the better we can tailor our training to it. So we're really helpful to receive those sorts of examples that you pointed out and work through them.
Right.
Chris McLeod, Box Hill Golf Club. Our membership categories are non-gender specific. You're a member or you're not, basically. There are different categories based on age and so forth, but not gender. Are we justified in having separate men's and women's competitions?
Is this another one for me?
Looks like it.
Bridie, do you want to go first? I can tell you from a legal perspective, but...
From what I understand, I think equestrian is probably the only Olympic sport where men and women compete against each other, because it's really the biggest test is can you afford a horse, I suppose, to do that sport. But of course there are differences between the physiological and strength-based and of course limb length and other issues that are different between the average size man and the average size woman. And of course it's always up to members, so you can have mixed competition, and we know men and women play golf together frequently. What I love about the sport of golf is that people are utilising the same facility at the same time, even though you can all be of different ability, and obviously the handicap process helps with that. And I think that's a wonderful way to bring people of different ability together. Again, coming back to cycling, you can ride with people who are far superior to you because of an aerodynamic benefit and ride beside them. But I also think it's important to ask yourself why you're doing what you're doing, and does it look after the members, and have you even asked them? So sometimes it's just a matter of surveying. A lot of cricket growth, for example, in the northern suburbs of Melbourne has occurred because a woman in the cricket club said, let's start a recreational women's cricket competition. And when the president said 12 months later, my goodness, we have 14 teams, I had no idea that there would be this many women who'd want entry-level cricket. She said, oh, did you ever ask them? And no one had ever asked all the people who were the wives, the friends, the sisters of blokes that were playing all day long. And so sometimes just asking people, what do you want, what do you prefer? Some women will say, I only want to play against other women, and some women will say, I'm really good and I want to be challenged and want to play against the best people that are available.
Look, I'd just make a general comment there that I think Australian golf, we have been fixated on competitions for over 100 years now. It's when we play golf with people from other countries, they're always astounded on how fixated we are on competitions. So we are unique in a sense. One thing that is happening is the World Handicap System. So the Australian system has tried to be as flexible as possible in allowing competitions to be held. But when the new World Handicapping System comes in, there's absolutely no barriers to clubs holding competitions, and it's not just about men and women, but it's about people of different standards playing in one competition off different tees. So the system will absolutely cater for that, and I think that's a positive thing. I do think golf will evolve a bit in this space. We may move a bit more to how the rest of the world plays their golf, maybe not totally, but I think perhaps there's some evolution there.
But just on that quick point, it's another cultural challenge for the game to ensure that people come to their golf course and think, well, I'm here today to have some fun and to participate in an event, which might involve a competition, but more so it's the fellowship of the people with whom I'm playing. And that is a big change. I know for years I'd arrive at a golf course and the first thing you do is you enter the competition. And I think more and more, especially for women getting into the game, speaking as a father, knowing our daughter who's a bit agnostic about golf, don't know quite why, maybe it's because she's totally dominated by the subject around the dinner table. But it's really interesting that Lou went off to Yarra Bend and had some lessons with 8 friends recently, a series of lessons, had a great time, but no pathway after that. And where do they go and play 3 holes, 6 holes, or whatever it might be? It doesn't really matter whether it's on a great course or a small course. It's just a matter of a course of a less quality. It's just a simple issue of how the girls can play and enjoy their company, because that's really the key thing, I think. Sorry, I've probably said too much. Yes, sorry, over here. Oh, I'll come back to you. Sorry.
I'm Malcolm Speed from Sorrento Golf Club. I have a complaint first. At Sorrento Golf Club, we have working parties set up to deal with equal opportunity. We have several women members on that committee, and they're very offended that this meeting is taking place at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday morning when they're all playing golf. Serious matters. Women's committees, we've heard stories about clubs getting in early and taking fairly drastic action in relation to women's committees. At Sorrento we have a terrific women's committee that does lots of work. It's energetic, enthusiastic, far-sighted. We wish to keep that Women's Committee intact. What do we need to do in terms of making sure that we don't breach the Act by having a Women's Committee, having a General Committee, but not having a Men's Committee?
It's not discriminatory to have a Women's Committee, and I think Women's Committees have been and continue to be really important parts of clubs. And again, if you look at it through that special measure prism, the importance of having female representation where women are visible in leadership roles within the club and contributing to decision making that happens within the club. I think that that's just important to ensure that women are mainstreamed to the club governance roles as well. So you might have a women's committee that is specifically around women's issues or promoting women's issues within the club, but to ensure that they are part of the mainstream decision making and governance of the club is really important as well. But I know that there has been this issue bubbling away at a few clubs about whether or not women's committees are discriminatory or whether they should be allowed, and the law is quite clear on this. They are allowed, they're not discriminatory, and I think that there is still a really important role for them. It's kind of similar to the question that my 14-year-old nephew asked me last week during International Women's Week, when he said to me, "Auntie Chrissy, I have an issue to take up with you as Commissioner." And I said, "Yes, what's that, Oliver?" And he said, "Well, at my school they're promoting International Women's Week, or International Women's Day, but there's no International Men's Day." And I said, "Well, every day is pretty much International Men's Day, Ollie. But secondly, there is an International Men's Day. It's on November the 19th. So go and knock yourself out if you want to develop some activities around it." But I think that just goes to the issue of historical and structural inequality, that it still persists. We know that it's still there. And I think women's committees have historically and will continue to play an important part in ensuring that the clubs are more inclusive and that they're more attuned to women's and girls' issues that sometimes people of the other gender just don't see or just don't think about.
Simon. Dale Marshall's my name. I'm seeking advice in terms of representation of women on club boards. Many golf clubs traditionally have the women's captain, women's president, or a combination thereof represented on their club committee or the club board. I have a concern that the sport may seek to, in striving towards a percentage target of female representation in governance roles, simply appoint females to a board because of their gender rather than the skills that they can bring to the table. And I think that many clubs will be challenged moving forward in trying to better balance the skills that are required to lead clubs, particularly in this strategic and corporate age, rather than simply having women represented just because of their gender.
Thank you. Great question. And when we do, at the ASC, when we go around to all the sports, as we do throughout the year, and do our roadshow on governance and modern governance, and this is what you should be doing and this is what you shouldn't be doing, this comes up a lot. Why should we just chuck women on the boards just to hit a target? And the short answer is you shouldn't. Absolutely. The board position should be on merit. They should be the best candidates. The board and the members and what we advocate is that sports have a nominations committee that actively do skills gap analysis of your board, see where, we don't have an accountant, we need a numbers person. We don't have a marketing person, we need a marketing person. We don't have a lawyer, you get the drift. And rather than just, who's left standing to go on the board, okay, you three will do for the next 2 years and then we'll rotate it around. That it's becoming much more, as sport is becoming more corporatised and more professional, that the selection of the board candidate should be as well. So why we say at the Sports Commission that it should be 40% is akin to these special measures. It's because the representation has been so low for so long that we've put this in place to encourage sports to start thinking about that. Of our top 23 funded sports, we have 9 at the moment that on a national level have hit the 40%. We have another 3 or 4 that are at 38.5% because their board is 9 and they've got 4 of 9, which is basically almost 40%, but the numbers don't quite work out. So you're 38% or whatever it might be. But so about half nationally are there at the moment. 5 years ago, maybe it was 3 nationally. So it is coming a long way. The other big one that sort of touches on your point is that the Sports Commission advocates a maximum term in office for board members. We say that boards should have a staggered rotation, so everyone doesn't go at once, that sort of the knowledge keeps on going as the numbers stagger off, and that board members shouldn't be on for longer than 10 years is our number. And we get massive pushback on that. Clubs and states in particular say, well, if I go, this place will fall apart. I've been here for 25 years. I've been sitting on the board for 25 years, and I'm basically the only thing holding this club/sport together. And we recognise on a day-to-day there's a lot of clubs that are like that. And if Joe Smith pulls his $3,000 of cash out that he puts in every, to top up the coffers, the club or the sport might fall apart. We know that. We're realists and we're pragmatic about that. But equally, we say, well, what are you doing about that? Who are you bringing along on the journey? How are you? What succession planning you're putting in place? You're not going to be around forever. So what are you doing about that? So we're doing a lot of work with sports on that. That was a lot of waffle, but to answer your question...
Can I answer the question?
Yeah, just to answer your question very quickly, it should always be on merit, but certainly trying to increase that diversity and inclusiveness should absolutely be a factor to consider in considering merit.
Remember, I love quoting this stat from Harvard Business School where they looked at 10 key criteria for a job. If a man has 3 of those 10, he will apply with confidence. A woman will believe she needs 9 of them to even submit her CV. So when we look at merit, we need to think that there are a lot of meritorious women who do not feel like they are qualified enough. They have imposter syndrome, or they're concerned about what people will say, or they have no board experience and no one on the board is saying to them, we will induct you appropriately, we'll teach you things, you'll learn the process, we'll check in with you on how you're going, you'll be mentored. So that idea that this bloke's been on a board before, he knows what he's doing, it'll be easier for us if we just hire him. So I think we need to be really careful about how we define merit.
Sorry, the merit question is close to my heart, so I'm just going to make one more point. Just when we think about merit and we say that, well, people shouldn't be appointed through a quota system or because they're not the most meritorious for the job, that is assuming that everyone in those current positions has got there on merit. And if you look around you on boards or in employment or anywhere else, can you absolutely tell me that that is the best person for the job? Often informal networks mean that people get tapped on the shoulder, or they have different connections, or they look like the person who has just vacated the chair. So you're more likely to appoint them. So don't just assume that because the person has the role that merit has necessarily worked in the pure way that we're now ascribing to it. I think it's kind of a bit of a trap.
That's a very rhetorical question. It doesn't apply in this case, the person standing before you, of course.
My name is Jenny Kidd from Eastwood Golf Club. Due to a recent VCAT decision, championship board events have now been moved from traditional Ladies' Day to be played on a weekend. Club championship, this is not an issue about discrimination in a male-female world, but I guess it's about moving part of our game, or a very important part of our game, in which 5-day members, of course, can no longer participate in or don't necessarily wish to participate in. And to give you an example, our club championships last year were played under these new rules, and we normally have 45 to 50 ladies who participate in this event, but we only had 8 people participate on the Sunday. And there was no one there to welcome the winner, which is a big deal, club championship. And normally on Ladies' Day, the whole field sort of follows the winners, and they come in and it's a big deal, and the presentation of the cup is a big deal. the presentation of the cup in this situation was a complete non-event because nobody was there. So my question to you is, how do you suggest that we get women to accept this in clubs around Victoria?
I'll have a quick go at that before I hand to the experts. That really something like this is, I think, picking up Kristen's point, there has to be pretty regular, constant dialogue when these changes occur. And of course there'll be some people who don't necessarily accept the change, but it's you'll find so many other clubs where championships, for example, have moved through to a weekend. I know in a club I know and love, it's a very big event. Women and men are playing the championships all on the Sunday. The club get behind it. It's a big deal because the club, through efforts to promote the event within the club, find that they get support for it. And of course, with different grades in the championship, there's people with different skills and skill levels, and it's still a great thrill, whether you're off one or in the C grade. To win an event is a big thing. So I think a lot of this has got, in a sense, hasn't got a lot to do with the law. It's really about how a club, as a group of people, seek to ensure that they want to participate and be involved in great activities. And sometimes these things take time. Hopefully, maybe in 5 years' time, even next year, maybe there'll be more than 8 people that play in the event.
Would that have to, we'd have, the majority of our members, lady members, are 5-day members.
Right.
So we would have to ask them to pay more
Right.
in order to participate on a Sunday, and that will not happen.
Right. Okay. Well, I understand. So you've got differential playing rights in that sense in a club. So it's different to a club that's got no differential playing rights.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
And of which there are many clubs like that in Golf Victoria.
True. Well, I think those issues have to be looked at over time, because the question, I guess, is how your fundamental business model in the club's going to run, and the question of access is important, because I guess there is a financial. I can see there's a financial issue for people having to pay more, but equally to get more women engaged in the game, to take greater involvement, to have more involvement in the club, maybe clubs have to look at enabling women to play. There are exceptions. Who's a 5-day member who wants to play on the club championship can actually play on the club championship qualifying rounds on a weekend. I mean, it's not beyond the wit of anyone to sort these things out. It's just coming up with something which is sensible to ensure that people feel part of the club.
Steve, I think everyone in the room has benefited greatly from the answers to the questions. Will Golf Victoria publish some frequently asked questions and the answers to them?
Yeah,
That would be helpful to all.
we'd be pleased to, and I think that was the point before, that we're really terribly keen to get feedback from clubs about their own experiences, and we'll do our best working with Kristen's team to ensure that that information gets disseminated regularly. And on our website, I know Simon's nodding furiously in the back there, or Greg Oakford at the back. We can make sure that that information is made available to people constantly, because the question about club championships and how do I sort it out for a 5-day member is a very real issue. But
This committee one is a very real
yeah, indeed it is. Indeed it is. Sure. Kay, you've got a question down the back?
Thanks, Simon. Kay Marlook from Woodlands. Yes, I can see that issue can easily be solved, because we allow our 5-day members to play in our championship, which is held at weekends, without question, and that's been done for a long time at our club. The other question I'd like to ask does not apply to Woodlands, but I'd like the Commissioner's opinion on if the structure, it's similar, because if the structure of the club is set up, the Constitution allows different benefits for different categories of memberships, which is quite legal. In a club where 97% of the women are in the 6-day membership, and the club constitution does not allow the 6-day members to attend the AGM or vote in the AGM, would that be considered as discriminatory on the basis of sex?
Yeah, I reckon you've got a good shot at that one, actually. On the face of it, it sounds like a structural inequity and a form of discrimination. And if that is occurring, then we'd be really happy to explore that with a club whose constitution might look like that.
I hate to do this and wrap it up as we're having some really good questions, but just one more. Jenny picking down in the front there, and then we've got to finish up because I think Stephen Pitt's got to get a plane.
You've identified me, thank you, Stephen. Jenny Picking from Peninsula Kingswood. Look, I think a lot of clubs struggle with the sort of subtle differences between equality and equal opportunity. And I'd just like to mention and ask the board, the panel's opinion about a club who obviously takes equality very seriously to the point where they've abolished their women's committee. It's an open timesheet. There are no women's competitions. The women play against the men. If there's a guest day, it has to be a women's and men's guest day. And even their poor old little 90-year-old women who'd play 9 holes no longer are allowed a spot on the timesheet. So I just think that takes equality to a ridiculous level, and I'd just be interested if that's an isolated opinion from me only.
Look, I take your point on that. I think at times you can go overboard and end up providing a service that members actually aren't after. So I think you do have to be really careful how you handle those issues. There is room for some difference in terms of how we play our golf in golf clubs, and members at times want different things. So I do think we need to try to cater for that and offer a product that makes people happy and allows them to play golf how they want to play their golf, as long as it's not in a discriminatory manner.
I think also Stephen raised great points before in answer to the earlier question, which is that consultation and listening to people is vital. All the lawyers in the room who've worked in mediation know that people want to be heard. They frequently don't feel heard. They don't feel like their voice or their opinions were registered. It doesn't mean we all think we're going to get what we want. So perhaps asking your members what they want and then going back to them and saying, for example, we asked all the women who have 5-day memberships and they all acknowledged that the club needed to grow and they thought it was annoying, but... So I'm not suggesting that your club would be able to do that, but I think that it's important to ask people or to tell them the why. We did it this way because we see there's a bit of short-term pain for long-term gain. And then other people can say, well, we disagree and we feel strongly and there can be good discussion. But if you don't have a committee who's asking people what they want, then you're allowed to communicate with them, surely, and say you're unhappy and provide suggestions, because everybody loves someone who can also provide a solution as well as identify a problem.
Thanks very much, Bridie. Look, we might bring proceedings to a conclusion. On your behalf, can I thank our 4 speakers very much, not only for what they've conveyed to us today, but obviously making time to be with us. It's great to see so many members of clubs with us this morning. Thank Huntingdale enormously for making the facility available. And Alex, please thank all of the staff for all of the work you've done in setting the room up. But thank you very much for coming, and we look forward to remaining in close dialogue with you as these issues get developed. And finally, my last act, and not to discriminate between the quality of the wine, we have some wine for each of our speakers.